the barbarian, the negative version of manhood, is always in the soul of every man. He just has to tame it. The noble manhood, the good manhood, the righteous manhood, the manhood that makes women secure and children thrive and communities powerful and what have you, that good manhood we all know about, lived out to the glory of God, that's something they've got to pursue. So once a man, or men as a whole, manhood as a whole, starts giving themselves to the negative side of manhood, sitting at a bar somewhere near a pole, shoving 20s into some girl's underwear, or sitting on the couch at home turning into Jabba the Hutt while they watch TV all day and eat themselves to death, that's always there. That's always possible. And then society starts to criticize it, which then we blame, but they're really normally society is just saying what's true. I mean, for example,
Hey, welcome back to another episode. I'm super excited today. We are interviewing one of my literary heroes, one of the main icons in the manhood and disciple space. What a great speaker, what a great author, what a great man. We have got Stephen Mansfield on Last in Line podcast. He is an author of several books, several devotionals on YouVersion that I've read. His most latest book, Men on Fire, Restoring the Forces That Forge Noble Manhood, is going to be our main topic of conversation. He's spent several years really mastering the art of speaking and writing and teaching guys how to be godly men, how to build a band of brothers, how to chase God, how to reflect the nature of Christ. He knows leadership. He is somebody I've wanted to have on here for a long time and never even thought it was possible. So I'm super honored and humbled that he's agreed to come on Last in Line podcast. But we've got a great conversation today. We're going to dig into his past a little bit. We're going to dig into this new book, a couple years old, but the latest book, I guess. And we're going to find out why he wrote it, why he did it the way he did it, why the topics he chose, why the 7 fires, why the order they're in. And we're going to talk about just how he sees the future of the country going and the mantle of masculinity and manhood that men are needing to take back and needing to forge ahead and take charge of. So I look forward to bringing to you today on Last in Line podcast, Stephen Mansfield. Well, it's been a long time coming anyway in my mind, and now it's finally here, but I've always wanted to have our guest today on, and finally God made it happen. Stephen Mansfield, welcome to Last in Line podcast.
man, it is great to be with you, John. Thank you so much for having me.
Man, as we were talking before we hit record, I've been admirer of yours for a long time, just reading your material and your resources on YouVersion and just the heart you have for guys and listening to some interviews that you've done. And man, it never changes. Your theme is consistent. Like you're right on point every time you're speaking because I know it's passionate from the heart. And what I thought was interesting, if you don't mind, we start a little bit about your background. And then I want to dive into this book, this latest book. I know it was 2020 is when you published it, Men on Fire, yes. But I want to dig in a little bit of that because I mean, so much good stuff in there and so much application for guys, which is what I'm about. And, but before I do, I think we have a little bit of a similar stomping ground. You went to Oral Roberts University. Is that right?
I did.
That's crazy. I grew up in a little town outside of there called Sapulpa, Oklahoma. Don't know that you know that, but ORU, man, it's been and you worked security actually for the Oral Roberts, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yes. At that time in the 70s, they pulled together some of the bigger, more athletic students and had them provide a kind of security perimeter for her. So that he didn't look like he was walking like a mafioso, with a bunch of armed guards. And so I provided security for a lot of years along with some other guys with him, traveled with him, got to know him well. It was a real privilege.
Wow, that's cool. Small world. I mean, Tulsa's a great town, and Oral Roberts is a great university. A lot of our staff here at our home church went to Oral Roberts. But so what led you there? Were you originally taking the pastor route in your mind, or no?
No, not at all. It's a funny story. I can tell it real quickly. I was a big football jock. My father was military. We had just moved from the military. I'm sorry, from Europe before my junior year of high school, and we went to West Des Moines, Iowa, which is one of the biggest high schools in America. And I played football, did well, and was recruited to play football at Iowa. But between my high school and college, the summer between my high school and college career, I had some moral crises. My mother had been witnessing to me, and I turned down the scholarship and went to ORU. Just one of those sovereign God things, and showed up at ORU. I'm not a believer yet, but they evangelized the freshman class real heavily. And so they know they get, kids that are just there because their parents wanted to be, which is kind of my story. My mom had applied for me, actually. And I became a Christian about third or fourth day on campus. And it was this was in the fall of 76. It was a marvelous experience for me. I mean, I realized there's a little bit of rocky history to Oral Roberts University, but I had a great experience with fantastic professors, fantastic guest speakers on campus. It really changed my life. I'm so grateful for it.
That's great. That's awesome. And it's rare that you hear someone's journey navigating them to a school like that, just kind of from their parents, no real intent of going into ministry, no real spiritual background, maybe, personally, but it's amazing God touched you there, and the rest is history. So, I mean, got several, furthered your education a couple times, right? Master's, doctorate, done some teaching. Am I right? And of course, yes, writing, but I got to know, when did you know that you were this writer, like you had this skill set, this gift, I want to call it, because you're not an ordinary, in my opinion, you're not an ordinary writer, and I'm a writer too. So I appreciate certain ways that you come at topics and certain ways you verbalize, and it's not for everybody. How did you know that this clicked with you and it was going to be your thing?
It's a great question, John. I majored in history at ORU. With a minor in theology. And I fell in love, first of all, with the spoken word. My teachers, played the speeches of Churchill or the speeches of Roosevelt, or we would read the speeches of Lincoln or what have you. And I fell in love with the spoken word first. And so this power of speaking the word and the poetry of it and the skill of it. And that then led to a love of the written word. And I became an inveterate reader as soon as I left college, when, of course, your time is dominated by your classes. I went out to West Texas and did some leadership there, and just read. I've always been a big reader, but I just devour books, and I would gravitate to books that were beautifully and poetically written. And then finally, some years later, I had the chance to write my first book, and I decided at that point that I wasn't just going to write in the same kind of reporting, kind of boring, kind of monotone way that most books are written. I find, frankly, most books, especially about topics of history and things like that, are written in a boring way. Mm-hmm. And that's because a lot of them are shaped by universities where there's kind of this academic style of writing. And I thought, I don't want to do that. I want to write with poetry and fire. I want them to smell the gun smoke. I want them to hear the bombs. I want them to smell the meal by describing. So I decided to write more movingly, more emotionally, maybe, still have the command of words, still have the academic heft, the footnotes, the knowledge, the research, but write with some beauty, because I think that when, 10 years later, what sticks with you is the power of the story and the beauty of the language, and not so much the academic facts, although they're important. So that's what led me to do that. And the first book I ever wrote was on Churchill, and it won a bunch of awards. And I realized that God was wanting to use me as a writer. And from that point on, I have, I've written about 25, 26 books, and I'm not done yet. Yeah. But it's a joy every time, because I really enjoy not only the topic, but the beauty of the language that I get to help weave a little bit. And so it's exciting. But that was my progression anyway. I wasn't a very good student back before college. It wasn't until I got engaged by some good teachers at my university that I really began to learn and love learning. And that's what changed everything.
Yeah. And the pen is really your paintbrush. And you paint this picture. And like you said, I think I heard you speak once before about this topic, and you said your goal is to have the five senses get stimulated through your
Yes.
written words, and to really
Yes.
tap into all of those. And I think that's amazing. And I think more writers should have that approach. But you're passionate about a particular topic, not just one, but I'm going to put it out there and put it up at the top of the list today for the sake of our conversation. This manhood, masculinity mantle that we've all been called to chase and to refine and to own. And so obviously looking around in culture, it's taken a few blows. It's taken some body blows, our masculinity, what the culture says it should look like. So you wrote a book called Men on Fire. And I need to know, so is culture and where it's going and sort of the toxicity that's around us in that regard, is that what was the fire for you writing it? Was that what ignited this in you?
Yeah, what it did for me, what lit me up was my concern, my disgust, my anger, my fear, perhaps, about the current state of manhood. I don't think society has done this to men. I think men have done it to themselves, and now society is critical of men because of the way they live. So I talk to men as though the power of change is in their hands. A lot of people want to attack society. You know, we have a highly politicized society, and a lot of people want to attack society and say they created bad manhood, they diminished men, but the barbarian, the negative version of manhood, is always in the soul of every man. He just has to tame it. The noble manhood, the good manhood, the righteous manhood, the manhood that makes women secure and children thrive and communities powerful and what have you, that good manhood we all know about, lived out to the glory of God, that's something they've got to pursue. So once a man, or men as a whole, manhood as a whole, starts giving themselves to the negative side of manhood, sitting at a bar somewhere near a pole, shoving 20s in some girl's underwear, or sitting on the couch at home, turning into Jabba the Hutt while they watch TV all day and eat themselves to death, that's always there. That's always possible. And then society starts to criticize it, which then we blame. But normally society is just saying what's true. I mean, for example, the U.S. government statistic is that about 20% of all college and university women are sexually molested. Well, who's doing that? Men, unfathered, untethered, unprincipled, undisciplined men without a vision for righteous manhood. So I take a different view than some folks who speak to men a lot. I'm not blaming society for what's happened. It's what happens to men. It can happen in any generation. It can happen at any time with any man, because it's always there in his soul. He just has to master the darkness.
Yeah. Yeah. And that would ignite a fire in anyone, I would imagine. And it just so happens it happened, you got this maybe inspiration during, the pandemic is when it came out, but obviously you had that inspiration long before. But I want to know from you, I want to hear you verbalize, just because I know you can do things on the spur of the moment, non-scripted, but you've got a way to just articulate. Give me your best definition of manhood in a nutshell.
Well, the briefest definition I can give is men living out their God-given design. So that would be the briefest. That has to be unpacked a little bit. You can't just say that and walk away. But I believe that when King David turned to his son Saul and said, in the King James Version, it says, "Show yourself a man," or other versions it says, "Be the man you're made to be," kind of thing, that he was alluding to a lore, a way of men, not just his biology. He didn't say be a male. That had been decided 20 years before. He said, be a man. And the implication in the Hebrew there is that there's a lore, there's a way of men, there's a role that men play in the world, and it's good and it's noble. So the best words that King David could say to his son is, "Go be a man." It's what I say to my son now. It's what I say to my grandsons. So all that to say that being a man is about mastering the God-given lore and calling of what it means to be a man, to conquer yourself, to master your negative desires, to ascend above the darkness, to ascend above the barbarian, to ascend above the wicked man, the evil man, the man who's living out of just his crotch rather than living out of his heart and his mind. and begin to not only be fulfilled as a man. I frankly find noble and righteous manhood to be gloriously fun, um, especially with my band of brothers, but also to live it for my wife, my children, my grandchildren, my community, my society, and in my case, just because I happen to have this platform, for the nation and the world, having as much impact as I can have. So the brief definition for me is living out the God-ordained design for noble manhood, and I take my biblical sanction for that from what David said to Solomon as he was passing from this life.
Yep. I like it. And sometimes simple is okay, and sometimes just cut and dry and right to the point is great. And, aside from the Bible, I don't know that we can sit down and just hand a book to our sons and say, this is all you need to know. Go read it, go take these tests, and then you're a man. You obviously had some people in your life that exemplified that. And your dad was a military, officer. He was, high ranking. You've mentioned, I think, that he was probably a pretty good disciplinarian, pretty straight,
Yes.
toe the line kind of guy,
Yes.
kind of like my dad. My dad was a captain in the Marine Corps. And so I know what that line looks like. So I guess you had a lot of those mentors, coaches, teachers, those kinds of things. Talk about the magnitude of young men having those anchors tethered to them, around them, in ways that they can see it more than just read about it or hear it.
Yeah, I use the phrase magnetic pull, John. I believe that my father was not the kind of guy to sit down with me and lean forward and say, now, son, I want to talk to you about your body. Or son, I want to talk to you about women. Or I want to talk to you about, but my father was a heroic man. He was a big figure. He was famous. He was a warrior. He'd come home, decked out with mud on him. And I mean, he was that kind of guy. And did he sit down and teach me every principle of noble manhood? No. And most fathers aren't going to, but what they'll do is they'll create a magnetic pull on your life. Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of these guys did. I grew up in a military context. I grew up in an athlete context. So there was a sense of heroism. There was a sense of sacrifice. There was a sense of team. There was a sense of belonging. There was a sense of character. You tell the truth. You stand with your friends. You don't steal. You don't lie. You obey your teachers. And all that stuff sounds real simple. It doesn't sound like it's uniquely lessons of manhood, but what it did was it created a magnetic pull on my soul, so to speak. It drew me towards a life of truthfulness, a life of honor, a life of sacrifice, a life of living for a higher cause. My father didn't talk about religion very much and wasn't a deeply religious man, but his whole life was devoted to God, country, and family. I mean, his whole life was about a greater cause. So I absorbed in my life this sense that a good man's meant to live for a higher cause. He's not meant just to live for his body and his paycheck and mowing the yard. He's got a higher cause to serve. Yeah. So we need to kind of let our fathers and the generation that produced us off the hook a little bit. Very few fathers ever sit down and teach us every detail of noble manhood, but they provided examples. They provided a magnetic pull, and that's a lot of the benefit they produce. And one thing I'll say, that's such a pronounced thing, not just from biological fathers, but from the community of men, that psychologists tell us that when a young man doesn't have a father in the home, other men in the community, uncles, people who are a little bit removed from the home but still active in the young man's life, can make as much as 85% difference of the difference that a biological father would have made. That's fantastic news. That means if you're born without a dad in the home, you're not doomed, you're not cursed.
Yeah.
And in my case, I had a rich life in the sense that I not only had this father who was a little bit distant as a military man, a little bit shut down emotionally, but that's okay. But the life he led put me in the middle of a noble military community. Yeah. And every day I saw honor being played out. Every day I saw men sacrificing their lives. And we lived behind the Iron Curtain and stood against the Soviet Union in Berlin, Germany for years and years and years. You saw commitment, you saw nobility, you saw sacrifice. So even if it wasn't my father sitting me down and talking me to death, which most boys wouldn't receive anyway, I was seeing it in action. I believe more of noble manhood is caught than is taught. And I was in an environment where I was catching a great deal, even though it wasn't articulated to me. And we need to realize it comes both ways.
Yeah, you're right. And you know, I keep going back to this word when I think of qualities that mold or that really shape a man and really define a man. And it sounds like you had a front row seat to these qualities, but courage and resilience and those kinds of things. Men do hard things. You know, you watched your dad every day go and grind and go
Yes.
fight an opposition and go do it anyway when he didn't feel like it, or if he had a runny nose, or, you know, so talk about resilience. Talk about, give me, is there anything in your life that maybe was a defining moment in the regard of resilience? Or, and I know there's not going to be just one lightning bolt moment, but did you have a season where you had to kind of make or break yourself on resilience? You had to make it, put a line in the sand, plant your flag on resilience and go forward. Did you have a situation or season that pulled it out of you and you realized, hey, yeah, no, this is what I need to be like. This is what I need to do.
I've had many of those in my life. Part of it is that I've moved a great deal. I've almost always been the new guy, and I've had some hard seasons in my life. The hardest season in my life, I don't mind talking about a bit. I was in my late 30s, early 40s, and my wife at the time left the marriage, having had an affair, and so I had to soldier on. I had to push through. I had to love my children and stay in the game and not descend into. I don't have any of these unique problems, but I'm saying the potential was descend into eating myself to death, descend into drinking, descend into whatever. I'm just saying pleasures,
Yep.
becoming Jabba the Hutt, watching the TV all the time. And that was the time I really had to endure. I really had to keep going. It was a bleak time. Obviously, divorce is a terrible thing. I had been the pastor of a large church in Nashville, and it was very public. It was humiliating. And I thought I would just run to another country because I've lived internationally. So living in another country would have been perfectly normal for me, and just hide. But I stayed in town. I loved my children. I kept going. Before long, I began to write some of the books for which I'm well known. That repositioned me financially, repositioned me publicly, and there was a rise. There was an increase. But I had to tough out maybe the hardest year of my life. So resilience, is one of the keys. I read a quote where Warren Buffett recently said that he was just talking about the stock market, but he said the stock market is a system for the impatient to hand over their money to the patient. And he's talking in economic terms there, but resilience, patience, hanging in, determining to continue through for the long haul, setting goals, hitting them if it takes years. That's what draws out the best in a man. I always have an athletic goal going, always some kind. It might be push-ups, it might be time on the exercise bike, it might be time on the racquetball court, whatever. I always have a goal because I know that by setting those goals and being resilient and pursuing those goals despite failures, that's how you draw out the best in your soul. And that's what happened during that horrible year of divorce and all of that. And then my life reset quickly thereafter, but only because I had stuck it out and endured the blows.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, and a lot of, folks that I guess they put a sort of a sexy caveat over this resilience and think that it means, charging a hill, with a rifle and you break your leg and you do it anyway. It's not one of those, it's not always one of those flashy, warrior moments. It's sometimes digging into the four walls of your home when things are a little rocky and pressing into God. And sometimes resilience looks like a man who has every reason and has permission to go off in left field in their faith, but digs in and gets around guys and is transparent and digs into God even further. Like, to me, that's a picture of resilience whenever they have every opportunity to bug out. And so, did you, I guess obviously your faith was a major anchor in that, but you must've had some folks around you, because you talk about band of brothers, you talk about, a brotherhood, that how crucial that is. We all hear about it, but I guess I can jump ahead a little bit and talk about some of these fires, and let's talk about friendship. Let's just go right in here. I had a perfect idea of where I wanted to go, but let's just go, man. And so, yeah, friendship, that's a hard one for me. That's a hard one for other guys that I know. Was that one of the fires maybe in that dark season for you that sort of helped was it a life raft for you? And talk about the need for that.
No question about it. It was a major one for me, John. I had moved to Nashville to become a leader in a large church here. Um, so all of my friends were in this church.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had become the senior pastor of that church. This is a couple of decades ago, three decades ago. And so when I had to leave that church because I was going, I could have stayed, but I didn't want to take the church through the divorce that I was going through because of the troubles with my wife at the time. So I ended up having to leave the church, and thus almost every friendship that I had, because you know how it is when you leave a situation, you leave people behind. Yeah. Well, fortunately, new men came into my life, but I realized my error.
Hey, do you guys like free stuff? Well, I mean, of course, not completely free, but maybe 20% free. My sponsors have been gracious enough to give Last in Line listeners 20% off with the code Last in Line. So I want to thank our sponsors, Gridiron Coffee. I want to thank Armored Coffee. I want to thank Lead Like Lions. I want to thank our sponsor, Do Work That Matters. And last but not least, I want to thank our guys at Cowboy Revolution Apparel. So thank you guys to our sponsors for supporting Last in Line Leadership. Go get you some stuff. Go get you some gear. Last in Line discount and get 20% off. Now back to the show.
I had allowed myself to have my friendships were a mile wide and an inch deep. Yeah. Most of my friends worked for me, which is not a healthy situation. Yeah. I didn't have people from the outside. I mean, so what began to happen is men began to come to me, new friends, and they began to say, look, I've known you for a while from a distance. I see who you are. I see what you're going through. You stand with me, I'll stand with you. And we began to form a new band of brothers, and I began to form new friendships on a different basis. It wasn't all of us working together. It wasn't all of us being in the same institution. And that transformed my life, I got to tell you. And I want to say, I'm not bragging to say this, I'm saying it to make a point to your listeners. I was pretty successful up to that point. Mm-hmm. I'd already written books that had done really well. I had a doctorate. I was pastoring a church of thousands. Mm-hmm. I was somewhat known around the country. It wasn't like I was failing professionally, but I was failing as a man. And my soul was in trouble because I didn't have men around me who understood me, but could know me without me narrating myself for them. I'm concerned that one of the things that doesn't work for a man is that, we got these accountability groups, and once a month we meet a bunch of guys for breakfast and we tell them what's going on with us, and then they give us advice and pray for us. Well, that's crazy. I got to have guys who see what's going wrong with me before I do. Yeah. I got to have guys who have the 3D view of Stephen, and I have the 3D view of them without them narrating it. And once I had that, after this situation, my life has been dramatically changed. And I've got a band of brothers you wouldn't believe.
I bet.
And they know Bev knows to call, my wife Beverly knows to call them if there's any crisis. If I'm out of town, something goes wrong, they're the ones she calls. They check with her just from time to time at my urging, just to find out how our marriage is, just to find out how I am. And it's not a Stephen project. I do the same thing for them. But it makes all the difference.
It does.
And the problem for most guys is they've got what you call rust friends. Psychologists call them rust friends. You had a bunch of guys you knew in high school or college. You had a bunch of guys involved in your wedding, but you haven't talked to them in 5 years. And so those are rust friends. Those friendships are rusting. But most guys don't have men immediately around them who are active in their life, helping them become good and noble men. And that's a mistake.
Yeah, for sure. And we got a lot to cover, but I want guys to read the book, because there's something you mentioned under the friendship fire that says there's some skills that you can master to having heroic men in your life. And I think that's key. So they're going to have to get the book to find out what those skills are. But yeah. And so did you write Band of Brothers before that season or after, when you met that new group of guys?
I wrote that coming out of that experience. I've written 3 books for men, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and then Building Your Band of Brothers. I wrote later after I'd learned some of these lessons. Okay. And I realized it was not a skill we were passing on to the next generation. Earlier generations of men, your ancestors, whatever your ethnicity is and wherever they lived, manhood was built in. People had extended families. Grandpa lived in the home. You lived in a tribe. You lived in a township. You lived in a village. Manhood was built in. You had it packed around. But today, you end up with that all stripped away. so we have to. It doesn't happen automatically. I don't live in a fort. I don't live in a village. I live in a downtown tower. I'm sitting in a downtown tower right now where our offices are, and so you've got to be intentional about building your band of brothers, and that's what the book is all about.
Yeah. And back then, you were forced to interact. You come out of your hut or whatever, your cave, for that matter, and you see the same people 24/7. So you don't have a phone to go sit on your bed and thumb click your life away. Back then it was just, you had to interact. And so I have to ask too, I think you've mentioned before in some of the past interviews I've heard you give, like why you came up with these are the crucial 7 fires that you feel for men are vital in restoring masculinity and making an impact in our culture. But were these in any particular order of importance, or were they in sort of leading up kind of to a crescendo of, I don't know if God was the last one, but God was the last one in the list that I saw. And obviously it wouldn't be in order of importance, but did you have was it schematically done how you went through these?
I'll tell you, my strategy was to put God last because I didn't want it to be primarily a religious book.
Okay.
Now I'm a Christian and I'm an unapologetic Christian. Anybody who listens to me for 5 minutes knows that.
Yeah.
But I wrote this book. I can tell it briefly. I'd written 2 books for men. I had started an organization to serve men, which is now post-COVID really rising. We're going to do a lot of things in the world. And I had spoken to a lot of men around the world, and been involved in the men's movement and what have you in a major way. But when I really watched what was going on with men, something was still missing. They would conform themselves externally to what the latest conference told them to do, or the latest book told them a man ought to be about. But something of an inner fire was missing. And I began to think about it, pray about it, study it, talk to men, pay attention to it. And I came up with these 7 fires. And I think that they are things that can be overlooked, even amongst men who are attempting to be really good men. Mm-hmm. We tend to focus, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but we tend to focus a lot on what men do wrong and correcting that, especially in our Christian men's movement. But I don't think you can shame a man to greatness. I don't think you make a man great just by telling him not to touch himself or not to eat too much or not to watch too much television. I'm for all that. Don't misunderstand. I mean, I'm for helping men be good men. Right. But then there's got to be an inner fire. And I think manhood should be fiery and passionate. And there should be coming from the gut. And men should share it. And so I began to think those things through. And that's where I came up with these things, the fire of heritage. We don't talk about that much. The fire of battle, the fire of destiny or legacy or friendship. We're not emphasizing that as much. So I wrote, that's why I wrote this book. And I think it's a book that has fit through the cracks that are in the edifice of the teaching and the training that we're doing of men out there. Grateful for all of it. All the leaders in the men's movement in the world are my buddies, even guys I don't agree with. Got neo-pagan friends and Latter-day Saint friends and all kinds of friends that are eager in the men's movement. And I love them all. But I think that there were some things missing, and this book was meant to address it.
For sure. And so I want to hit on a couple quotes that you had in here. And destiny, you hear destiny, and there's not a whole lot of rugged dudes sitting around at a coffee shop talking about destiny, right? I mean, I think it's gotten sort of maybe a fluff, title behind it maybe, or perception of men think it's fluffy. Well, I mean, we don't have a problem talking about purpose, or calling, these kinds of, so these are interchangeable in my opinion. But I want to read a quote to you, and I thought it was powerful. It says, why can I never settle, never be fully satisfied in any one phase of life? I believe it's because destiny refuses to leave me alone. Destiny calls on to more, to greater, to deeper, to all that still awaits. Man, I mean, okay, never heard it put that way before. That'll get your attention. So destiny keeps chasing me, won't leave me alone. Like, I know guys have a problem with the word, it's semantics, whatever, but was there a point what was the point where you actually decided, this is my destiny, like this is my mission statement, this is what I'm put here for? Like, what did that look like? And how did you come up with that? Your destiny personally?
No, it's a great question. I think it comes in bits and pieces. I think it forms itself in your soul. It's not like I had one day of revelation. I'll tell you, it started, went to college and began to understand that I really am a teacher. And then I began to understand that I'm a speaker. So I'm a teacher speaker, and in time writing came. Okay, so you understand who you are. Fundamentally, Stephen Mansfield is a teacher. You can even tell in the way I'm talking on this podcast that fundamentally I'm a teacher. And so then second of all, that piece landed, and then I realized I was called. I believed as a Christian, called to this generation, put here by God, meant to fulfill purposes, noble purposes. You get married, you have children, you have a house, you have a yard, you have a car. These are all things you're meant to take care of. You have a field assigned to you, as Paul said in Corinthians. But over time, then I began to wonder, okay, I've got all this training. I understand who I am. I understand my basic gifts. What am I meant to be devoted to? And as I've already said, I pastored for a lot of years. That was great. But pastoring is real wide, real broad. As I transitioned out of that in the middle of my life, knowing for years before that I would, I began to realize that all my prior life had been preparation. And the thing that was really working on my soul, the thing that really was getting me churned up, the thing that really kept me up at night and caused me to grieve was the state of manhood. And so my point is, it takes years for the understanding of destiny to fully form. You don't just have an experience one day and go, poof, I'm going to run a restaurant, or
right.
Poof, I'm going to start a school, or poof,
right.
Things form over time. You understand who you are, you mature, you grow. When you first start thinking you might have a destiny, you're not ready, you're not mature enough, you couldn't sustain the strain. Lord have mercy. When I first started thinking about making a difference in this world, I could not possibly have sustained in my character and in wisdom or whatever what I'm doing now. Could not possibly. So you have to grow, you have to mature, you have to be tested. But it comes, the good news for everybody is that it comes progressively. It comes in pieces. There's one job I did for a summer where I realized I've got leadership skills. This is back when I was a teenager and going to college. These guys are following me. I've got some leadership skills. There's something about me that makes them want to turn to me for answers. And, all right, well, I must have a leader gift. I want to see if I can develop that and maybe get some people to mentor me in that. You just start piecing it together. But the main thing is to pursue. And then along when the right time comes, matching your gifts to the moment, you start really taking hold of a new level. And that's how it was for me. I'm post-divorce, post my pastoral years, post my academic training, having already written some New York Times bestsellers. Suddenly I realized I'm probably, even my last name makes me think, and confirms for me that I'm meant to impact men, Mansfield,
It might be something to that. No, that's great. And
I'm
so
not saying I did it for that reason. I'm just saying that, when I looked up, hey, my name's Mansfield,
this is my calling. Well, I like that you said it comes in pieces, because I think we all look for that lightning bolt moment. And I think when it doesn't happen, we get discouraged, or we think we may not have a destiny, or we don't know what that is. I think it's good to kind of identify what you're good at and align those. And you got to be self-aware enough to kind of see and follow the leading, of the Holy Spirit and those kinds of things. So, you did something kind of unique, I thought, with the love fire. We talk about, so there's 7 fires and we're not going to hit all of them in respectfully your time on a holiday weekend, but destiny, heritage, friendship, love, battle, legacy, and God. Okay. So the love portion, I just want to touch on this, because when I'm reading the Bible, when I'm listening to a pastor preach, the love chapter is 1 Corinthians 13, every wedding you ever go to, right? Sure. Mine included. You chose a scripture for that section out of Galatians 6:9. And I thought that was interesting. The one that's, don't grow weary in doing good, for in due season you'll reap a harvest if you don't quit. I'm paraphrasing. But your quote there is, it says, if we lose the battle for love, but the truth is that most of us never engage in the fight, we don't know there is one. So I think that has to maybe correlate with that scripture. But can you unpack that a little bit, why you chose that, or did you even intentionally? Yeah,
I can do. I'm happy to do that. I talk about in that chapter that women are superior in all areas of aptitude when the tests are given, except for 2: abstract thought and aggression. Men are better in abstract thought and aggression than women on in general, and women are superior in all others. So part of what feeds love for men is that they keep a vision for what they love. You and I are buddies. We're hanging out all the time. We're going to do stuff to hurt each other. We're going to disappoint each other. We're going to be late or whatever. But the key is for me to keep a vision of who John is and what he means in my life and how much I love him and what we can do together. Keep that vision going. Well, even more with your wife, even more with love for your children. Here's the bad news. The bad news is that all love can go away. all love can dissipate, all love can decrease. So the battle for a man is to keep that noble vision. You know, you married Cinderella, you married this beautiful queen, and she looked amazing on that wedding day. Well, one day you're going to see her a little heavier and with the curlers in her hair and no makeup. And you're going to go, well, it's not quite what I had in mind. And then there's going to be some arguments or what have you that happen to every married couple. And before long, you could drop out of love. Well, now you got a disaster. You're going to have an affair. You're going to lose your marriage. Kids are going to be damaged. I mean, but a man has an ability to fight for that noble vision of who that person is. Keep that vision. She's not just, Janie in curlers,
Sure.
post-pregnancy with some extra weight on. She's a queen. She's beautiful. Here's what I loved about her. Lord, thank you for this woman who has these amazing gifts and does these amazing things. And so by battling to keep the higher vision for what you're focused on in love, you feed that love. And men have that ability and they rarely use it. We tend to think love comes, love goes. It's just a thing that drops on us like from the sky. It's not true. It's something we can rekindle. It's something we can battle for. It's something we can keep alive, and we need to. Most of what fuels a man's life, whether he thinks of it this way or not, is love. Love for his purpose, love for his business, love for his country, love for his community, love for his family, love for his band of brothers. And it keeps him going, and even love for himself, which is an important part, taking care of yourself and making sure you get rest and, making sure you have some fun with your band of brothers, get out in the wild a little bit. Right. So that chapter is really important to me because I've spent so much time talking to men, coaching men, counseling men, that I've talked to men late in their lives who allowed love to lead their lives. And it led to divorces, and it led to addictions, and it led to affairs, and it led to kids they haven't seen in 2 decades. Yeah. It led to disasters. And if they kept the fires of love burning in their soul by keeping the vision alive, they would have had a richer and a more powerful life.
Yeah, I love it, and that's a great explanation, and it makes total sense that we are fighting for that, and it's not always about feelings. Love's a choice, and it's not just necessarily that you got up and felt like loving somebody today. Man, I got to be respectful of your time, and man, I hope someday we can finish this talk because I've got a lot to uncover. But I did want to just talk about one other thing. You talk about legacy in here and some other really good ones, and God, of course, could be a whole other hour of conversation. But your legacy is writing itself, of course. And like you just said, if you had to put one word on it, teacher, would be coming out of you, even, effortlessly comes out of you. So was there a part of this, as we kind of talk about, folds into legacy a little bit, but was there a part of this book, the Seven Fires, book, that struck a chord more with you as you're writing it? Was there something that just kind of went off in you? Maybe it ripped open an old wound, or maybe it just kind of reminded you of this really fire in your belly for something. Was there a part of this book that stood out as striking a big chord with you?
Probably the one that struck me the most was the friendship one. And that'll be a surprise because I've written so much about my friendships and my band of brothers and so on. Part of it is that I grieved that in the first half of my life, I didn't have the significant relationships in a band of brothers. As I say, a huge part of my life was having friends who worked for me and not having really guys who were outside of that. The other part is that while I've got great men around me now, I travel a great deal. I mean, I really travel a great deal. Delta Airlines is like my second wife. I am all over the world. I speak a lot. I travel a lot. And I'm real good about, Bev and we have certain policies and rules. We go with each other. She's a very well-known songwriter and producer. I'll go with her. She'll go with me. We're not apart too much. And so it's not damaging our marriage. And we're empty nesters. We don't have kids at home. Mm-hmm. But in terms of having significant friendships, and by the way, in terms of having the man time that I need apart from work, like go hunting, go fishing, go skydiving, go do whatever, go do the rowdy stuff that men need to do together, and then sit around in your gym shorts afterwards and raise a glass and have a fun. And if you smoke stogies, whatever. I don't, but I mean, just whatever.
Sure.
The point is that kind of time as I was writing the book, as much as I urge that for men, and as much as I've been changed by it, at this stage in my life, that is a little bit challenged only for good reasons. Like,
Sure, yeah,
I'm an author who speaks. I'm doing. Isn't it ironic that I'm somewhere in the world speaking to a large stadium of men, and I'm not, but I don't have my own friends around me. And so I'll tell you what I did, though. I decided to put a lot of my really gifted, kind of visible friends on the board of Great Man, the organization. So we go now together and do these big events. So my band of brothers is now built into what I do. But I was challenged when I wrote the book. I thought I'm doing well in most of these, I'm pretty solid. I lived those things out. But as odd as it is for a guy who wrote a book referencing himself about building your band of brothers, it's kind of it's gotten a little distant. It's got a little strained. It's got a little, just because of good reasons. Hey, Mansfield's going off to the Philippines to talk to 100,000 men. Yeah. Great, that's all cool. Where's his band of brothers? Who's with him? So I just decided to build it into what we do. They don't work for me. I work for them, really. They're the board. That's awesome. But we're a band of brothers. And so now I've done some corrections. And I've also started to build trips and time with guys. In other words, I'm not seeing my buddies every day when I go to the office. I don't really go to an office, so to speak. Yeah. But I'm correcting that. So that was the one that convicted me the most. Yeah. And it just goes to show you that no matter what your strengths are, you can drift away from them. And that's so true. Relationships, very much my strength, but just busyness caused me to drift away from them. Yeah. So great question.
No, that's good. That's really good. Man, I think that was for somebody. I mean, it was for me, because that's really probably one of my blind spots and one of the areas I could be more intentional. It sounds like you were self-aware enough to build that in, even though you knew there was a vacancy. You kind of plugged in something and build some things around that. But all right, I do one thing at the end with everybody. Sure. I don't want you to feel left out. I know you got to go so we're going to run through this, but it's called, I did this in corporate America. We've done this to evaluate leaders and things, but it's called Start, Stop, Continue. You can do it in any order you want, and maybe you've done this before, but where's an area, help my listeners understand Stephen Mansfield and what kind of your intentions and goals and dreams are. So what do you want to start doing? What do you want to stop doing? And then what do you want to continue to do?
I want to start aggressively burning off fat. I'm healthy and I'm not obese, but I've got a little bit of a belly, a little bit of a flap. I'm getting a little bit older. My body burns food a little bit differently. So even though I've been healthy, I'm starting right now with some intermittent fasting and working out more, doing more body weight exercises when I'm in the hotel room and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Yeah. Stop. I want to stop. I'm stopping being as busy. I'm handing over a lot of what I do to other people. I'm staying in my lane. I've had not just because of COVID, but because of all the things that I do, DC politics, men, writing, television, etc. I've been too busy. So I'm stopping it. I'm trimming it down. And I want to continue to deepen with my band of brothers to be the best man I can be. I don't think you can get there on your own. I mean, here I am, fairly visible coach and teacher and writer about men's stuff, but I can fail just like anybody else if I don't have men around me, seeing what's going on with me. In fact, it was the guys who say, Mansfield, you look fine, but there's no question your belly's thickening up. Obviously, something's changed, either with age or not working out or having too many Oreos or whatever it is. My guys came to me and said, you need to do something to burn off that fat if you're going to stand in front of men and inspire them to greatness. That's how it works.
There you go.
I wasn't offended. I didn't tell them to go away. I got busy. So there's my start, stop, continue.
That's good. That's real good. And I really appreciate, man, you coming on today. It's been great. I'm super excited that you made time for it, because I know I can only imagine your schedule, but I'm very humbled by you coming on and sharing with our audience. Talk to us about where to find your resources. I'm going to put a lot of the book links in the show notes and different things, but StephenMansfield.tv, I think is your website.
For me personally, it's StephenMansfield.tv, but our Great Man work hinges off of GreatMan.tv.
Okay.
All of our extensions are TV. So StephenMansfield.tv, Stephen spelled with a PH, the only way that ought to be legal, and then GreatMan.tv.
GreatMan.tv. Well, I tell you what, you're certainly an example of what manhood looks like, and just you're living what you're preaching. And I speak for everyone that's been a viewer, admirer of yours. Thank you for what you do and who you are and what you're going to shape in the world to come. So thank you for all you're doing, and thanks for being here. He's been Stephen Mansfield. We've been Last in Line. Be blessed.